The dust of Tres Piedras was the color of old blood, and it tasted like failure. It coated the splintered rails of the cattle pens, the warped clapboard of the saloon, and the faces of the men who had gathered in the heat. It was late afternoon, the sun a merciless white eye in a bleached blue sky. Ayanna stood on a crude platform made of freight pallets. Her wrists were raw where the ropes bit into her skin. A purple bruise, shaped like a man's thumb, stained her jaw. She was one of a dozen, girls from different tribes, captured and dragged here, survivors of massacres and raids. They were the spoils. The auctioneer, a man named Sipes, sweated through his gray shirt. He gestured to the girls with a tobacco-stained hand, his voice grating and loud. "These here are hardy stock. Gentlemen, cleaned up. They'll cook. They'll scrub. They'll warm your beds on a cold night. No papers, no trouble. What am I bid for this fine Ute girl?" The crowd was a mix of miners, drifters, and hard-bitten ranchers, all of them smelling of whiskey, sweat, and loneliness. They jeered. They appraised the girls like livestock. Ayanna kept her eyes fixed on the distant line of the mountains. She would not cry. She would not beg. She had been taught what her name meant, the honor of her people. What she felt was not fear, but a cold, heavy stone of rage in her belly. This was a world of animals, and they were trying to make her one of them. One by one, the girls were sold. $1, $1.50. A man with a greasy beard paid 75 cents for a small girl who was weeping silently. Then Sipes pointed to Ayanna. "And this last one, a wildcat. This one, Apache. Got spirit. If you like 'em fiery, look at her. Strong. What'll you give me?" A man shouted, 50 cents! 50 cents for an Apache? Sipes laughed. "She'll kill you in your sleep. Jeb." "Maybe I won't sleep." Jeb cackled, and the crowd laughed with him. The bidding stalled. No one wanted the one who looked back with open hate. She was too old to break easily, too proud. She was trouble. 50 cents going once, Sipes said, losing patience. A voice cut through the noise. It was quiet, but it carried $2. The crowd turned. Even Sipes looked surprised. A man stood at the back of the small crowd, near the water trough. He hadn't been there a moment ago, or perhaps he had, and had simply been part of the shadows. He was tall, dressed in worn canvas and leather, his hat pulled low. He looked like any other cowboy, save for the scar. It was a pale, puckered line that ran from his left cheekbone down to his jaw, a white seam in his sun-darkened skin. He pushed his hat back slightly. His eyes were the color of slate, and they weren't looking at Sipes. They were looking at Ayanna. Sipes grinned. "Well now, Mr. McCrae, a man of taste, $2 it is. Anyone care to say 2 1/4? Silence. The men shuffled. They looked at Silas McCrae, and they looked at the Apache girl. The muttering started, low and venomous. "McCrae, what's he want with her? Always knew he was strange. Injun lover." Silas ignored them. He walked forward, pulling 2 heavy silver dollars from his pocket. He dropped them onto the auctioneer's dusty table. The clink was final. "Sold," Sipes said quickly. "She's all yours. Silas, good luck." Silas McCrae stepped up to the platform. Ayanna flinched, her body tensing for the blow she knew must come. This was the moment of ownership, the first strike. He didn't move. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable. He pulled a knife from his belt. It was a plain, sharp skinning knife. She watched the blade, her heart hammering against her ribs, but the rage held it steady. He didn't touch her skin. He reached behind her and, with one clean slice, cut the ropes binding her wrists. The fibers fell away, leaving her hands free but stinging, her arms trembling from the sudden release of tension. He nodded once, a sharp dip of his chin. "Get down!" Ayanna rubbed her wrists, the blood starting to seep from the rope burns. She glared at him. The hate was so pure it was almost a comfort. She looked at this white man, this scarred man who had bought her for 2 pieces of silver, and she made a vow. She did not move. Her voice was a low rasp, dry from thirst and disuse. "You'll regret this." He waited, his face giving nothing away. "I won't obey," she said, the words tasting like ash. Silas looked at her for a long moment. The crowd was still watching, hungry for the drama, for the taming of the wildcat. He didn't hit her, he didn't shout. He simply turned his back on her and walked toward his horse, a lean bay tied to the rail. He expected her to follow. For a second, Ayanna thought of running. But where? Into the arms of the jeering crowd? Into the open street where she'd be caught in 10 seconds and beaten? Or worse. Her new owner didn't look back, cursing him, cursing the world, cursing the sun in the sky. She slid off the platform. Her legs nearly buckled. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. He had his bay horse and a pack mule. He didn't motion for her to walk. Instead, he cupped his hands. An order. Silent and plain. He wanted her on his horse. She stared at his hands, then at his face. He was offering her his own mount. This was not the act of a master. It was something else. Confusing. She struck his hands away. He sighed, a faint sound of impatience. Before she could react, he gripped her by the waist, his hands hard and impersonal, and lifted her, setting her sideways on the saddle as if she were a sack of flour. The sudden strength of it, the casual intimacy of the touch, made her skin crawl. She was on his horse, and he was on the ground. He took the reins of the bay and the lead rope of the mule, and began to walk. He led her straight through the center of Tres Piedras, past the saloon, past the general store. The townsfolk watched them go. The mutters followed them like flies. Ayanna kept her back straight, her chin high. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. She was the daughter of a chief, and she was riding. He was a white man, and he was walking. She held on to that small, bitter victory. They left the stink of the town behind, heading into the vast, empty expanse of the high desert. The sun set in a blaze of orange and violet, colors too beautiful for a world so cruel. Silas McCrae did not stop until the last light had faded, leaving only a sliver of moon and a spray of cold stars. He made camp in the shelter of a low rise. He was efficient, moving with a practiced economy that spoke of a life spent alone. He built a small, smokeless fire of dry greasewood, picketed the animals, and unrolled his bedroll. He opened his saddlebag and took out a strip of dried jerky and a canteen. He tossed them both into her lap. Ayanna caught them by instinct. The jerky was tough as leather, salty and glorious. She tore at it with her teeth, not caring that he watched. She drank the water in greedy gulps, the lukewarm, metallic taste a balm on her raw throat. When she was done, he said nothing. He sat by the fire, checking the action on his rifle. She watched him, waiting. The food and water were a debt. Now he would come to collect. But he didn't. He finished with his gun, took a swig from a different canteen, and ate his own piece of jerky. Then he stood up, walked a good 10 yards away from the fire, and laid out his bedroll. He took off his hat and his boots, but nothing else. He lay down and, within a minute, had turned his back to her. Ayanna stared. He was sleeping, or pretending to. He hadn't tied her. He hadn't touched her. He hadn't even spoken more than 3 words to her since leaving town. She sat awake for hours, the fire dying to red embers. The desert night grew cold. She listened to the sound of the mule stamping its foot, the sigh of the wind over the sagebrush, and the steady, quiet breathing of the man who had bought her. She didn't understand him. And in the harsh world of the New Mexico territory, anything you didn't understand was something that could kill you. She slept, finally, in short, fitful bursts. Her hand closed around a sharp piece of stone. They traveled for 3 days. The world around them was vast and empty, a landscape of red cliffs that looked like wounds in the earth, deep, snake-filled canyons. and plains of scrub that stretched to the curve of the sky. The wind never stopped. It was a bitter, scouring wind that stole the moisture from her skin and the hope from her heart. Silas remained a silent shadow. He walked. She rode. He gave her food. He pointed her to water. He never, ever touched her. On the second morning, she tried to escape. He was checking the mule's pack, his back turned for a moment as he retied a strap. She saw her chance. She slid from the bay's back, silent as a lizard, and bolted into a dry wash thick with mesquite. She was fast. In her own land, she would have been gone. She hadn't taken 5 steps before he was on her. He didn't shout. The only sound was the crunch of his boots on the gravel. He grabbed her by the shoulder, spun her around, and shoved her back toward the horse. His grip was like iron. He was angry. She could feel it radiating from him like heat. But he didn't strike her. He just pointed at the horse. She climbed back on, her body rigid with humiliation. On the third day, she tried again. This attempt was smarter. She waited until he was watering the animals at a small, brackish seep. He was downhill from her, preoccupied. She didn't run. She slipped away on foot, using the cover of the boulders, moving low and fast. She put a good 100 yards between them before he even noticed. She scrambled up a rocky incline, heading for a ridge. If she could get over it, she could lose him in the maze of arroyos beyond. She heard him coming. He wasn't on the horse. He was on foot, and he was faster than he looked. He moved with a long, ground-eating lope that spoke of endurance. He took a different route, cutting her off, using the terrain against her. He met her at the top of the ridge. She saw him and tried to double back, but her foot slipped on the loose scree. She fell, and he was on her. This time it was not a shove. It was a tackle. He hit her hard, and they rolled together in the dust and sharp rocks, a tangle of limbs. She fought him, fueled by a blinding panic. She scratched, she bit, she kicked. She was fighting for her life, for her freedom, for the right to die in these hills as herself. He didn't hit her back. He just absorbed the blows, grunting, his arms wrapping around her like steel bands, holding her wrists, pinning her body with his own. He held her down until her screaming stopped, until her struggles weakened, until she was just a trembling, exhausted heap beneath him. He was breathing hard, his face inches from hers. Dust caked his scar. His gray eyes were lit with a cold fire. He pushed himself off her, getting to his feet in one weary motion. He hauled her up by the arm. None of the impersonal lift from the first day. This was rough. "You keep running," he said, his voice low and ragged. "We both die out here." He pointed, a sweeping gesture at the barren, endless land around them. "There's nothing. Not for 50 miles. Not for me. Not even for your people. This ain't your land anymore." She hated him. She hated him for buying her, for touching her, and most of all, for being right. He let go of her arm. "Walk." He made her walk back to the horses. He rode his own horse, leading the mule, and she stumbled behind him in the dust, her pride shattered, her body aching. The sky changed on the 4th day. The sun was obscured by a high, thin haze, and the air grew still and heavy. The light turned a sick, yellowish-brown. Silas, who had been scanning the horizon all morning, stopped. He sniffed the air. "What?" she asked, her voice cracking. It was the first word she'd spoken to him since the auction. He didn't look at her. He was looking southwest. "Get on the mule." "I will not." "Get on the damn mule," he snapped. "Now." He lifted her onto the pack animal, throwing her leg over the supplies. He mounted his horse and grabbed the mule's lead. "Hold on." He spurred the horse into a trot, then a canter, dragging the mule behind. Ayana clung to the ropes, bouncing painfully. Behind them, the horizon was disappearing. It wasn't a cloud, it was a wall, a solid tumbling wall of brown dust that reached from the earth to the sky. The wind hit them first, a physical blow that staggered the horse. Then the sand came. It was not a storm. It was the end of the world. The air turned to night, a screaming, scouring night. Sand and grit filled her mouth, her nose, her eyes. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't see. The horse was neighing in terror. Through the chaos, she felt Silas grab her arm, pulling her off the mule. He was shouting something, but the wind tore the words away. He half dragged, half carried her, pulling the animals along. They stumbled through the blinding grit. He was heading for a dark shape she had barely noticed, a shadow against the gloom. It was a wall. They fell into the lee of it, collapsing against the crumbling adobe. It was an old ruin, maybe a mission or a line shack, long since abandoned. Most of the roof was gone, but 3 walls still stood, offering a meager pocket of shelter from the worst of the wind. Silas shoved the animals into the corner, their backs to the storm. They huddled together, heads down, trembling. Ayanna slid down the wall, curling into a ball, pulling her thin blanket over her head. She was coughing, spitting out mud. The noise was deafening, a constant, high-pitched shriek that seemed to come from inside her skull. Beside her, Silas was coughing, too, but his cough was different. It was a deep, tearing sound, a wet, ragged gasp. He was trying to breathe, but it sounded like his lungs were full of gravel. She peeked out from the blanket. He was leaning against the adobe, his head thrown back. Even in the brown gloom, she could see he was pale. He was shaking, a fine tremor that ran through his whole body. He fumbled for his canteen, his hand unsteady. She watched him. He was weak, sick. She could leave. The storm was terrible, but she could take the horse and try. He couldn't stop her. He dropped the canteen. It rolled in the dust. He swore, a weak, choked sound, and tried to lean over to get it, but another spasm of coughing seized him. He collapsed onto his side, gasping. Ayanna stared. He was her captor. He was a white man. He deserved to die here, in the dirt. But if he died, she was alone, 50 miles from nothing. She didn't know this land. She had no gun, no water, no food save what he carried. Her survival depended on his. She crawled over to him, her movements reluctant. She grabbed the canteen, uncorked it, and shoved it at his mouth. "Drink," she commanded. He looked at her, his eyes clouded with sickness and surprise. He drank, coughing and sputtering. The water seemed to help, but the shaking didn't stop. He was sick. The dust inhalation had settled deep in his chest. She looked at the pack on the mule. She knew where he kept his bedroll. She untied it, her fingers clumsy in the grit, and unrolled the heavy wool blanket. She threw it over him. He didn't thank her. He just closed his eyes, his breathing a painful rasp. She retreated to her side of the small shelter. She helped cover the horses' heads with empty grain sacks, her hands moving with an efficiency born of her own past. Survival was survival. It had nothing to do with kindness. The storm raged all night. The wind screamed like a dying woman. They huddled in the dark, 2 enemies trapped in a crumbling box, listening to the world try to tear itself apart. By morning, the wind had died. The world was silent, buried under a layer of fine, brown dust. The air was cold, the sky a pale, washed-out gray. Ayanna was stiff, frozen. Her thin blanket had been useless against the sharp, post-storm chill. She sat up, shaking. Silas was awake. He was sitting up against the wall, his face gray with exhaustion and grime, but his eyes were clearer. His breathing was still rough, but the desperate gasping was gone. He was watching her. The silence stretched, broken only by the snort of the horse. Ayanna had to know. The question had been burning in her since the auction. Now, in this dead, quiet world, it came out. "Why?" He looked at her. "Why did you buy me?" she asked again, her voice stronger. He looked away, staring out at the new dusty landscape. He coughed, a dry, hacking sound. and spat. "Because if I didn't," he said, his voice a low rasp, "some drunk bastard would have—" She stared at him. That wasn't an answer. That was just a fact. "That is not a reason." He turned his head and met her gaze. His eyes were old. "Yes, it is." He looked down at his own hands, calloused and dirty. "I used to be one of those men, down in Texas, after the war, did things—" He stopped. "Not anymore." Ayanna considered his words. It was an admission, but not an apology. It didn't change anything. He had still bought her. The cold was seeping into her bones. The sun was up, but it had no warmth. She began to shiver, a deep, uncontrollable tremor that shook her whole body. She wrapped her blanket tighter, but it was useless. Silas watched her. He didn't move for a long time. Then he sighed. He pushed his own bedroll, the heavy wool blanket he had been wrapped in, toward her with his boot. "Take it," he said. She shook her head. Pride was all she had left. She would not take his warmth. "Don't be a fool," he grated. "You freeze. I gotta carry you, and I ain't in the mood." She still refused, huddling deeper into herself, her teeth chattering. He swore under his breath. He didn't move toward her. He didn't try to force her. He just opened the heavy blanket, creating a space beside him. "Get in," he said, his voice flat. "Or don't. But I ain't listening to your teeth chatter all night. We're stuck here till the animals recover." She stared at the open blanket. It was an invitation to surrender, to huddle against the man who owned her. It was repulsive. But the cold was a physical pain. It was driving needles into her skin. To refuse was to risk sickness or death. It was the longest journey of her life. The 2 feet that separated them. She crawled, slowly, her limbs stiff. She slid under the edge of the heavy wool blanket, keeping as much distance between them as possible. She lay on her side, her back to him, rigid as stone. He, in turn, kept his back to her. They were 2 people pressed together by a deadly cold, separated by a canyon of hate, pride, and history. She could feel the faint warmth of his body, a presence she despised. She stared at the crumbling adobe wall, listening to the wind start to pick up again, and the sound of his rough, damaged breathing beside her in the dark. She did not close her eyes. It took another 4 days to leave the lowlands. The air grew thinner, colder. The red rock of the desert gave way to scrub oak, then tall ponderosa pine that clawed at a pale, unforgiving sky. They climbed, following a narrow game trail that only Silas seemed to know. The bay horse was breathing hard, and the pack mule stumbled, weary to the bone. Ayanna rode in a dull haze of exhaustion and hunger. She had ceased to be a person. She was a thing that endured. She watched the man in front of her, this Silas McCrae. He never seemed to tire. He walked with a steady, relentless pace. His scarred face pointed toward the high peaks. They came into a small clearing just as the sun was beginning to bleed behind the western range. And there it was. It was not a ranch. It was a shack. It was an old mining hut, built of rough-hewn pine logs, chinked with mud that had crumbled in places. A crude stone chimney leaned against one side. It looked small, dark, and utterly isolated. It was the loneliest place she had ever seen. Snow still clung in high, dirty patches on the north-facing slopes of the hillsides around it. Silas walked past the shack to a small, leaning corral and began to unsaddle the animals. He didn't look at her, didn't tell her what to do. Ayanna slid off the mule. Her legs were numb, her body a single, deep ache. She stood in the dirt, the cold wind pulling at her hair. This was her new prison. It was better than the auction block, and worse than the open desert. It was a cage made of wood and silence. Silas finished with the animals, rubbing them down with a handful of dry grass before turning them into the corral. He hefted his saddlebags and rifle. Inside. She followed him. The single room was dark. It smelled of cold ash, old tobacco, and dried sweat. It was a man's space, containing nothing soft. A narrow cot was built against one wall, a rough table and 2 stools in the center. A fireplace, black with soot, dominated the far wall. Silas dropped his gear. He struck a match and lit a kerosene lamp on the table. The yellow light pushed back the shadows, revealing shelves holding tins of food, a few iron pots, and a stack of folded blankets. He turned to her. In the lamplight, his scar looked deep and jagged. "There's a spring out back," he said, his voice flat. "Buckets there. We need wood." He looked at her filthy, torn clothes. He went to a wooden chest at the foot of his cot and opened it. He pulled out a pair of worn canvas trousers, patched at the knee, and a dark wool shirt, thick and clean. He tossed them onto the table. "They'll be big, but they're clean." Ayanna stared at the clothes. They were a man's. An offering of work clothes, not a dress, not the clothes of a woman meant for a bed. She felt a strange, bitter relief. She picked them up. The wool was coarse against her skin. "The chores," he said, turning to build a fire. "I handle the wood and the stock, the traps. You handle the hearth, the mending, the cooking." He was giving her a domain, the inside of the shack. "I will not be your slave," she said, her voice quiet but fierce. He stopped, his back to her, a piece of kindling in his hand. He didn't turn around. "I ain't asking you to be. I'm asking you to pull your weight. You eat, you work, same as me." He lit the fire. The wood caught, crackling, sending a sudden, welcome wave of warmth into the room. Tension settled between them, as thick and cold as the mountain air. Ayanna hated him. She hated this shack, hated the smell of him, hated the debt she owed him for $2 silver. But the fire was warm, and the shelter was real. She had survived. For now, survival meant staying under the roof of Silas McCrae. She put the clean clothes on her side of the hearth. She would wash first. She would claim her own space. The first week was a silent war. They moved around each other in the small cabin like 2 wary wolves, neither turning their back, neither speaking unless it was necessary. "Pass the salt. The wood is wet." He called her girl. "Stop," she said one evening. They were eating a thin rabbit stew she had made. He looked up, his spoon halfway to his mouth. "What?" "My name. It is not girl." He stared at her. His gray eyes were hard to read. He seemed to be weighing her, measuring her words. She expected him to say it didn't matter. She expected him to assert his ownership. "My name," she repeated, her voice low and clear, "is Ayanna." Silas looked back down at his stew. He finished the bite. He said nothing. Ayanna felt a cold twist of anger. He had dismissed her. But the next morning, when he was heading out to check his trap lines, he paused at the door. "Ayanna, there's a storm coming in from the north. Don't stray far." He had used her name. It was a small thing, a breath of air, but it was the first time since the massacre that a white man had called her by her name. It was not kindness, she told herself. It was just a fact. But it settled something in her. She was not girl. She was not property. She was Ayanna. He was gone most of the day, hunting, mending the corral fence. She worked inside. She cleaned the shack with a furious energy, scrubbing the floor, washing his few dishes until they shone, mending the holes in his blankets. She was not doing it for him. She was doing it for herself. She would not live in filth. One afternoon, he returned not with a rabbit, but with his pistol belt. He laid it on the table. The gun was a Colt, dark and heavy. "You're gonna learn this," he said. She looked at the gun, then at him. "I do not want your weapon." "It ain't mine," he said. "It's a tool, like an axe. Out here, you need to know how to use it. I'm not always gonna be here." He took her outside. He set up a row of empty tins on a log. He showed her how to hold the pistol, how to brace her arm. His hands came near hers, showing her how to load the cylinder, but he never made skin contact. His instruction was impersonal, like a blacksmith showing an apprentice. "It kicks," he warned. "Don't fight it. Let it rise, bring it back down, squeeze the trigger. Don't jerk it." He let her fire. The sound was deafening, a sharp crack that echoed off the mountains. The force of it jolted her entire arm, stinging her shoulder. The shot went wide, kicking up dirt 10 feet to the left. She glared at the gun. It was heavy, violent. "Again," he said. She hated him. She hated the weight of the gun, the smell of the black powder, but she learned. She learned because he was right. This was a tool, and it was power. She fired again and again. On the 5th shot, she hit one of the tins. It spun into the air, a small, satisfying victory. She lowered the gun, her arm trembling. "I don't need saving," she growled, repeating the words she'd said at the auction. He nodded, taking the pistol from her. He began to clean it, his movements economical. "I believe that." He paused, ramming a cleaning cloth down the barrel. "But you might need killing someone, and I'd rather you do it right, instead of just making 'em mad." He was practical. She didn't understand him, but she understood that. A few weeks passed. A fragile, unspoken truce settled. The snows on the hills melted, feeding a creek that ran fast and loud a quarter-mile from the shack. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Ayanna needed to wash. She was tired of the sponge baths inside the cabin, the smell of wood smoke and dried sweat that clung to her. She waited until Silas was gone. Far up the ridge, the rhythmic thwack of his axe echoing faintly. She took a bar of lye soap and her clean change of clothes down to the creek. The water was shockingly cold, stealing her breath. She was hidden, surrounded by aspen trees. She unbraided her hair, letting it fall, thick and black, down her back. She scrubbed her skin, rubbing it raw, trying to wash away the memory of the auction, the feel of the ropes. She was washing her hair, her back to the trail, when the sound of the axe stopped. She froze. The silence of the woods pressed in. She felt it, a prickle on her skin. She was being watched. She turned slowly, clutching the wet wool shirt to her chest. Silas stood at the edge of the trees, a bundle of firewood in his arms. He hadn't been chopping. He had been gathering. He was watching her. His face was still, his gray eyes fixed on her. He wasn't leering, not like the men at the auction. It was something else, a quiet, heavy stillness. But it was a violation. It was an ownership he had claimed with his eyes. "You look at me!" she shouted. Her voice was sharp. "A weapon." He flinched, not at her voice, but as if waking from a dream. He looked away, down at the wood in his arms, his face flushing dark red under his tan. He cleared his throat. "I'm sorry." He didn't make an excuse. He didn't say he was just walking by. He just said he was sorry. He turned and walked back to the shack, his back rigid. Ayanna finished washing, her hands shaking with anger. She dressed quickly and returned to the cabin. He was not there. He had left the wood by the door and was gone. He didn't come back for supper. She ate alone. He didn't come back that night. She slept, for the first time, alone in the shack. He had taken his bedroll and his rifle. He was gone for 3 days. She didn't know if he was coming back. She felt a sharp, cold spike of panic, followed by a fierce surge of independence. She had the shack. She had the food. She knew how to use the pistol. She would survive. On the 3rd evening, he returned. He was carrying 2 rabbits. He walked in, dropped them on the table, and went to the water basin. He didn't look at her. "I'll skin these," he said. He had apologized, and then he had given her space. He had respected the boundary he crossed, a small, fragile thread of trust, finer than a spider's web, began to form in the cold, silent air between them. The outside world found them 2 weeks later. Ayanna was outside, hanging jerky on a line, when she heard the horses and the shouting. 4 men rode into the clearing. They were not from around here. They were hunters, their horses laden with pelts, and they were drunk. Silas came out of the shack, rifle in his hand, held low and casual. "Can I help you?" One of the men, a big bearded man with a greasy hat, grinned. "Just looking for a little hospitality. Friend, maybe a drink. We're dry." His eyes slid past Silas, landing on Ayanna. His grin widened. "Well, what have we here?" Another man squinted. "Hey, I know her. That's the Apache girl. From the auction at Tres Piedras, the one McCrae bought for $2. The bearded man laughed. "Is that right? Silas McCrae. Heard you was an Injun lover. Guess the rumors are true." He looked Ayanna up and down. "She worth $2. McCrae, or she just property?" Silas hadn't moved. "You got 5 seconds to get off my land." The bearded man dismounted. He was big, and the whiskey made him brave. "Or what? You and your squaw gonna fight all 4 of us?" He took a step toward Ayanna. "Maybe we'll just take her, see what $2 gets you." Silas didn't raise the rifle. He set it against the cabin wall. He walked forward, his movements calm. When he was 2 feet from the man, he spoke, his voice low. "I said, get off my land." "Go to hell, McCrae." The man swung a clumsy, drunken fist. Silas moved. He didn't block the punch. He stepped inside it, grabbed the man's arm, and used his own momentum to spin him. He drove his fist into the man's face. It was not a saloon brawl. It was a single, brutal, calculated strike. The sound of the man's nose breaking was a wet, sickening crack that cut through the mountain air. The man screamed, a high, bubbling sound, and collapsed, blood pouring from his face. His 3 companions froze, their hands moving toward their pistols. Silas turned to them. His face was a cold, scarred mask. "Get him, and get out!" The men looked at Silas, at the rifle leaning against the wall, and at their friend bleeding in the dirt. They weren't that drunk. They grabbed their leader, hauled him onto his horse, and wheeled around. One of them pointed a finger at Silas. "You'll regret this, McCrae. We'll tell the town. We'll tell them what you're doing up here." They galloped away, leaving the clearing in silence. Silas stood for a long time, watching them go. He was breathing heavily. He looked down at his right hand. His knuckles were split open and bleeding. He turned and went inside. Ayanna followed him. The silence in the shack was deafening. He went to the basin and plunged his hand into the cold water, wincing as it stung. He grabbed a dirty rag and tried to wrap it. Ayanna watched him. He had protected her. He had called her land my land and defended it. She walked over to him. She took the dirty rag from his hand and threw it on the floor. He looked at her, surprised. She went to her small store of herbs and clean cloth. She came back and took his hand. He let her. She cleaned the wound, her touch efficient, impersonal. The skin was broken, the knuckles raw. She could feel the bones beneath. She ground a poultice of yarrow in her palm and pressed it into the cuts to stop the bleeding. His hand was warm. He didn't pull away. As she wrapped the hand in clean linen, her fingers brushed the old, pale scar on his cheek. It was smooth, unlike the rough skin of his jaw. She paused, her touch lingering. "You kill men before?" she asked, her voice just above a whisper. He stared at the far wall, where the fire was dying. "Too many," he said. His voice was hoarse. "Most for nothing." He was quiet for a long time. She finished tying the bandage. "That," he said, nodding at his bandaged hand, "was for something." She let go of his hand. The intimacy of the moment hung between them, heavy and strange. She had touched him, and he had let her. She had cared for him, and he had confessed to her. She sat on her own stool by the fire. The barrier between them had been breached. "My father and my brother," she said, her voice flat, speaking to the flames. "They went to the fort for peace talks. They carried a white flag. The soldiers shot them. Silas closed his eyes. My mother died after the coughing sickness from the cold. We were running. I was caught trying to flee with my baby cousin. She stopped. Her throat felt thick. He did not survive. He was too small, the cold. She had never told anyone this. She said it now, in this cold, dark shack, to this scarred white man who had just broken another man's face for her. Silas said nothing. He didn't offer empty words of sorrow. He just sat there, in the dim light, and listened. He received her story, the weight of it, and held it. That night, the cold returned. A late storm blew in, rattling the windows and moaning down the chimney. Snow began to fall, sharp and fast. Ayanna slept on her pallet by the fire, but sleep was not a refuge. Her confession had brought the memories to the surface. They swarmed her. She was back in the snow. She was running, the baby in her arms, his small body cold. The soldiers were shouting, the gunshots, her mother's cough. She woke up with a scream trapped in her throat, a choked, desperate sound. She was thrashing, fighting the blankets, her voice crying out in Apache. A hand clamped down on her shoulder, firm, grounding. Ayanna. She opened her eyes, wild with terror. Silas was kneeling over her. The firelight cast shadows across his face. You're safe, he whispered. You're safe. It's just a dream. She was trembling, cold sweat on her skin. She looked at him, her vision clearing. She saw not her captor. She saw the man who used her name, the man who apologized, the man who bled for her. A sob, a raw, deep thing, tore itself from her chest. It was a sound of all the things she had lost. She lunged forward, not thinking, and clung to him. She buried her face in his rough wool shirt, her hands grabbing his arms. She was not seeking a man. She was seeking an anchor in the black, icy water of her past. Silas was rigid for a moment, shocked by the contact. He had held her once before, in the desert, a captive. This was different. This was a choice. Slowly, his arms came around her. He didn't pull her closer. He didn't stroke her hair. He just held her. His warmth was steady, a solid presence against her trembling. He was a wall against the storm, both outside and in. You're safe, he said again, his voice a low rumble against her ear. She clung to him, weeping for her family, for her people, for the baby she could not save. They stayed like that for a long time. They didn't speak. There was only the sound of her quiet sobs, the steady rhythm of his breathing, and the sound of the snow hitting the roof, burying the world in white. Two broken souls, wrapped in one blanket, holding back the dark. The snow melted in a rush, a sudden surrender. The world, which had been silent and white, was now loud with the sound of running water. The creek behind the shack turned from a gurgle to a roar, its banks overflowing with cold, clear water. The smell of pine, sharp and clean, was replaced by the deep, rich smell of damp earth and rot. Spring had come to the high country. With the thaw, something inside the shack thawed, too. The rigid, silent truce that had defined their winter gave way to a new rhythm. Ayanna claimed the land around the cabin as her own. She found wild onions by the creek and dug for bitter roots. She used one of Silas's empty tins to plant a small patch of herbs near the door, tending to the green shoots with a fierce, quiet possessiveness. She learned the snare traps Silas used, and soon she was catching rabbits as often as he was. She mended his clothes, patching the canvas of his trousers with a small, neat stitch, using the sinew he brought back from a deer kill. She was working, not as a slave, but as a partner in survival. And she began to speak. The silence had been a weapon, a shield. Now, it was just silence, and it felt heavy. One morning, she watched him by the fire, struggling with the coffee pot. He measured out the grounds, boiled the water, and poured a cup of the thick, black liquid. He took a sip and grimaced. "This is not coffee," she said, her voice clear in the morning quiet. Silas stopped, the cup halfway to his mouth. He looked at her, surprised. It was the first time she had spoken without being spoken to. The first time her words were not about survival or pain. "It's mud," she said, a small, almost invisible quirk at the corner of her mouth. "You hunt, you build, you cannot make coffee." He looked into his cup, then back at her. A low, rusty sound came from his chest. It was almost a laugh. "It's what I got. It's hot. It's bitter. It does the job." "It does the job of tasting like burnt mud," she replied. He took another drink, his eyes on her over the rim. "Then I reckon I'm just a man who likes burnt mud." A line had been crossed. The heavy, dark thing between them, the auction, the capture, the fear, had not vanished, but a new thing was growing beside it, fragile and green as the herbs by her door. The spring rains began in the following weeks. They were not the violent, scouring storms of the desert, but warm, soft rains that left the air clean and made the pines weep sap. One afternoon, Silas was at the corral, replacing a rotten rail. The sky opened up, a sudden, gentle downpour. He pulled his hat low, intending to finish the job. He expected Ayanna to run inside from where she was scraping a rabbit hide. He heard a sound, a quiet splash, and looked up. She was not running inside. She was standing in the center of the clearing, her face turned up to the sky. She had kicked off her heavy boots and was standing barefoot in the mud. The rain was plastering her dark hair to her head, running in rivulets down her face. And she was moving. It was not a dance he recognized. It was a slow, swaying movement, her arms lifting and falling, her feet turning in the slick, wet earth. It was a private thing, a quiet ritual of thanks, or of release. Silas stopped working. He stood by the fence, the hammer heavy in his hand, and he watched. He was mesmerized. He had seen her as a captive, a survivor, a fighter, a partner. He had never seen her like this. He had never seen her as a woman, soft and unguarded, finding joy in something as simple as water from the sky. She turned, still moving, and her eyes met his. He felt a hot rush of shame, the same he'd felt by the river. He was caught watching, stealing a moment that was not his. He expected her to glare, to stop, to run inside. Her privacy shattered. Ayanna looked at him. She saw the rain dripping from his hat, the hammer in his hand, the way his gaze was fixed on her. She held his look, and she did not stop. She kept moving, a slow turn of her shoulder, a slight bend of her knee. She was claiming this too, claiming the rain, the mud, and his right to watch her. Silas's breath caught. He did not move, he did not look away. He just watched, a tightness in his chest, until the rain slowed and she finally stopped, her chest rising and falling. She bent, picked up her boots, and walked back into the shack, leaving him alone in the wet. That night, the cabin felt smaller than it ever had before. The rain tapped on the roof, a gentle, insistent drumbeat. The fire was low, casting leaping shadows on the walls. They ate in their usual silence. But it was not the old silence of mistrust. It was a new, charged silence, full of the memory of the rain, the mud, and the look they had shared. Ayanna sat on her stool, mending a tear in her own sleeve. Silas sat at the table, cleaning his rifle, his hands moving with practiced, efficient motions. He stopped, his hand still on the barrel. He was looking at her. She felt his gaze, but she did not look up from her sewing. He stood and walked to the hearth. He stood over her. She tensed, the needle stopping in her hand. "Ayanna," he said, his voice low. She looked up. His face was a mask of shadows and firelight, his scar a pale line in the gloom. He looked lost, as if he were fighting a war inside himself. He reached out, his calloused, bandaged hand moving slowly. He did not touch her face or her hair. He gently, hesitantly, touched her wrist, the place where the auction ropes had been. His thumb rested on her pulse. She did not pull away. She did not flinch. She just watched his face, her heart hammering against her ribs, a rhythm that matched the one under his thumb. The touch was a question. He saw the stillness in her, and he mistook it. He thought it was the old fear. His face tightened. "You want me to leave?" he asked, his voice rough. "I can take my bedroll, sleep in the shed." He was offering to go, to give her the space he had given her before. She looked at his hand on her wrist. This man who had bought her, this man who had saved her, this man who had apologized. "I don't know," she answered. It was the most honest thing she had ever said. He read the truth in her eyes. He had offered to retreat, but she had not asked him to. He leaned down. It was clumsy. He was a man who knew violence and solitude, not tenderness. He hesitated, his face inches from hers. She could smell the rain on his clothes, the faint scent of gun oil and pine. She did not move. She did not lean in, but she did not pull back. His lips touched hers. It was not a kiss. It was a pressure, a question. It was slow, half accidental, and searching. It was rough. His lips chapped. It was nothing like she had imagined. And she felt a shiver, a deep tremor that ran from her stomach all the way to her fingertips. It was not fear. It was longing. It was the feeling of a body that had been frozen for years, suddenly remembering what it was to be warm. He pulled back, his eyes dark, searching hers. Ayanna let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. She had to draw the line, to set the terms. This was a choice, not a surrender. "I don't belong to you," she whispered, her voice fierce. "Not ever." Silas looked at her, at the pride that burned in her, a fire that had never gone out. He nodded, accepting her terms. He stepped back, putting a foot of space between them. "And I don't deserve you," he replied, his voice thick. The world interrupted them 3 days later. A man on a tired mule rode into the clearing. He was a traveling preacher, a thin man named Josiah Hale, who carried a Bible in one hand and a bottle of whiskey in the other. He was lost, and he was grateful for the sight of a cabin. Silas offered him coffee. The preacher took it, grimacing at the taste, and his eyes fell on Ayanna. He saw Silas, the scarred, rough white man. He saw Ayanna, the young Apache woman. He saw the single room, the one cot, the pallet by the fire, and he put them together. "Son," the preacher said, his voice full of pious concern, "you are living in sin. The Lord's eyes are upon this place." Silas, who had been cleaning a snare, went still. "It is not too late," the preacher went on, warming to his subject. "This woman, this heathen, she may be saved, and so can you. I can perform the rites. I can join you in holy matrimony. I can make this arrangement proper." Ayanna, who had been grinding herbs, felt a hot, white flash of rage. This man, this stranger, with his soft hands and his book, was trying to define her again, to make her proper, to fit her into his world, like a peg in a hole. She bristled, her back straightening, her hand gripping the stone pestle. Silas looked at the preacher. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't touch his gun. "She ain't lost, preacher," Silas said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And she's not something to make proper for your comfort." The preacher was taken aback. "But the girl, your soul." "My soul's my own business," Silas said. "And she is not the girl. Her name is Ayanna." He stood up. "You've had your coffee. The trail to Tres Piedras is due south. You best be on it." The preacher, seeing the look in Silas's eyes, scrambled to his feet. He gathered his Bible, mounted his mule, and rode away. casting fearful glances back at the sinful cabin in the woods. Silas watched him go. He had done it again. He had drawn a line in the dirt. On one side was the world, the town, the law, the church. On the other side was Ayanna. He had chosen her. That night, the barrier that had been cracked by the kiss was gone entirely. The preacher's visit had burned it away. They ate in silence, but the air was electric. After they had cleaned up, Ayanna went to her pallet by the fire. Silas remained at the table. The tapping of the rain had stopped. The only sound was the crackle of the flames. He stood up. He walked not to his cot, but to her. He stood before her, just as he had 3 nights ago. He did not touch her. He just waited. Ayanna looked up at him. This time, there was no question in his eyes. There was only need, and she knew it was a mirror of her own. She stood up. He reached for her, and this time, there was no hesitation. His hands went to her face, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. His touch was rough, but it was not violent. It was desperate. She met his kiss. It was not clumsy this time. It was hungry. It was a kiss of 2 people who had been starved, not just of food, but of touch, of warmth, of anything that was not pain or survival. It was intense, a collision. He lifted her, his arms sliding under her back and knees, and carried her the few feet to his cot. It was small, barely wide enough for one. He laid her down and followed, his body covering hers, a heavy, warm, solid weight. It was hesitant at first, a fumbling of clothes, a moment of stillness where they just breathed, their hearts pounding against each other. He was trembling, or maybe she was. She looked at him, at the scar, at the pain in his eyes. He was not a master taking his property. He was a man, as broken and as lost as she was. She reached up and put her hand on his scarred cheek. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch as if it were a fire. And then there was only need. It was physical, intense, a release of all the fear, the anger, the loneliness. It was a desperate, grasping thing, a fight to prove they were still alive. They moved together, 2 broken pieces fitting, trying to make a whole. Afterward, they lay tangled in the small cot, the wool blankets rough against their skin. The cabin was silent. Ayanna was pressed against his side, his arm heavy over her waist. He was asleep, or pretending to be. She stared into the darkness, at the dying embers of the fire. She felt different, not clean, not proper, but seen. She turned her head, her lips close to his ear. "It hurts less," she whispered, so quiet she barely heard herself. "When it's someone who sees you." His arm tightened around her. He was not asleep. The world they had barred the door against was not done with them. The hunters Silas had beaten had not forgotten. They had gone back to Tres Piedras and they had talked. The rumors swirled. The quiet, scarred recluse. Silas McCrae was shacked up with an Apache. He'd beaten a man half to death to protect her. The town, which had already despised him as an Injun lover, now saw him as a threat. A few days later, a new man rode into town. He was not a local. He wore a dusty hat and a Texas star. His name was Sheriff Bragg, and he was not interested in local gossip. He was interested in a bounty. He unrolled a poster in the saloon. It offered $200 for the capture of a half-breed girl, known to be Apache, wanted for horse theft and murder down near the border. It was a lie, a piece of paper meant to legalize a lynching, likely paid for by the hunters' families. But the paper was real, and Bragg was a bounty man as much as a lawman. Silas rode into Tres Piedras for supplies 2 days later. Unaware, he left Ayanna at the shack. "Bar the door," he said. "Don't open it for anyone." He walked into the general store, and the whispering stopped. The storekeeper, a man named Peters, looked at him with pale, frightened eyes. "What is it, Peters?" Silas asked. "You shouldn't be here, Silas," Peters muttered. not meeting his eye. "There's a Texas lawman over at the saloon. He's looking for the girl." Silas felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. "Looking for her for what?" "Murder," Peters whispered. "And horse theft." Silas knew. Instantly. It was a lie. He knew it was the hunters. He paid for his flour and beans, his mind racing. He could run. He could go back, grab Ayanna, and disappear into the high country. But they would be hunted. That bounty poster would follow them. A lie on paper, in the hands of a lawman, was as good as a bullet. He had to stop it here. He walked out of the store and headed for the saloon. Back at the shack, Ayanna had not barred the door. She had watched him ride away, and a cold dread had settled in her heart. He had been gone too long. This trip was different. She remembered the threat from the hunters. "We'll tell the town." She took the pistol, the one he had taught her to use. She checked the load. She strapped a knife to her belt. She did not saddle the horse. She ran, moving through the trees, using the game trails, a shadow moving toward the town. She arrived on the ridge above Tres Piedras as the sun was setting. She saw Silas's horse tied outside the saloon. She crept closer, keeping to the deep shadows between the buildings. Inside the saloon, the air was thick with smoke. Sheriff Bragg was at the bar, flanked by two of the hunters. Silas walked in. The saloon went quiet. "Sheriff Bragg?" Silas said. Bragg turned. He was a big man, with a gut and cold, porcine eyes. "That's me. Who's asking?" "My name is Silas McCrae. I hear you're looking for someone." Bragg smiled, a slow, ugly movement. "I am looking for a murderin' Apache whore. You seen her?" One of the hunters snickered. "He's seen her. Sheriff, he's been seeing her real close." "That poster's a lie," Silas said, his voice flat. "It's revenge, paid for by these two." "This poster is legal writ from the state of Texas," Bragg said, tapping the paper on the bar. "All I care about is the bounty. $200, dead or alive. Now, you gonna tell me where she is? Or am I gonna have to tear your high country nest apart?" "She's not with me," Silas lied. "And you ain't taking her." "I think I am," Bragg said. "And I think I'll take you too, for aiding and abetting a fugitive." Bragg went for his gun. Silas was faster. He drew his Colt, but he didn't fire. He pointed it at Bragg's chest. "Don't!" The saloon was frozen. The hunter to Bragg's left, the one Silas hadn't broken, was moving, his hand slipping toward his own pistol. "I wouldn't," Silas said, not taking his eyes off Bragg. "You can't watch all of us, McCrae," Bragg sneered. From behind the bar, the second hunter, the one with the freshly broken nose, had been hiding. He rose up, a double-barreled shotgun in his hand, pointed not at Silas, but at his back. Ayanna, peering through the dirty saloon window, saw it. She saw the man rising, the twin barrels. She saw Silas, his attention fixed on Bragg. She didn't think. She raised the pistol, bracing her arm against the window frame. She squeezed the trigger. The explosion shattered the window and the saloon's silence. The hunter with the shotgun screamed and collapsed, the shotgun discharging into the ceiling, filling the room with smoke and plaster. Silas reacted instantly. He fired, not at Bragg, but at the lamp over the bar, plunging the room into darkness. "Ayanna!" he roared. He dove for the door. Bragg was firing blind into the smoke. Silas burst into the street. Ayanna was already running for the horses. He grabbed her, shoving her behind the water trough as a bullet from the saloon splintered the wood where they had been. "Get to the bay!" he yelled. He untied his horse, firing back at the saloon door to keep them inside. He mounted, swung down, and grabbed her arm, hauling her up behind him. "The mule!" she cried, thinking of their supplies. "Leave it!" he shouted. He kicked the horse, hard. They galloped out of Tres Piedras, the sound of shouts and gunshots fading behind them. They rode hard, not looking back. They left the town, the shack, and their entire world behind. They rode west, into the dark, jagged canyons, running for their lives toward the Arizona line. They rode the bay until its breath came in wet, ragged gasps. They left the high pines, dropping down through the foothills, into a different world. The green and cold of the mountains surrendered to the red and heat of the low country. They had fled Tres Piedras with nothing. One horse, one rifle, one pistol, and the clothes on their backs. The mule with their food, their blankets, their small store of comfort, was gone. The terrain became their enemy. A third pursuer more relentless than Bragg or the hunters. They entered a maze of sun-baked rock, jagged canyons that forced them on long, weary detours, and plains of hard-baked clay dotted with cactus and thorn. The Arizona line was 100 miles of hell away, a shimmering, imaginary line in the heat. They ate what they could find. Silas shot a lizard with a pistol, the small crack of the gun sounding tiny in the vast emptiness. They cooked its tough, white meat over a tiny, smokeless fire of dry mesquite. Ayanna, using the knowledge of her people, found a patch of prickly pear and carefully burned the spines off the pads. The slimy, sour flesh, eaten raw, was all that kept the starvation at bay. They found water in potholes, natural tanks in the rock, stale and warm and teeming with insects. But they drank it. They strained it through a piece of Silas's shirt, their throats so dry they barely tasted the foulness. They spoke little. The days were for endurance, the nights were for listening, huddled together, though the desert nights were not the sharp cold of the mountains, but a thin, empty chill that offered no rest. They were no longer lovers, not in the way they had been in the shack. They were two animals, running, stripped down to nothing but survival. On the 5th day of the run, the bay horse went lame, a sharp rock, a bad step in a dry wash. It limped, favoring its right foreleg, its head hanging low. Silas examined the leg, his face grim in the twilight. He ran his hand down the tendon. "It's done." He took the saddle off, catched it under a rock overhang with the bridle. He slapped the horse's rump. "Go on, find grass." The horse, free of its burden, limped away into the dusk. Now they were on foot. The heat, which had been a heavy blanket, became a furnace. The sun was a white, blinding eye. The rocks shimmered, and the air was so hot it hurt to breathe. They had one canteen. They shared it, sip by sip until it was empty. Ayanna, who had been raised in the desert, knew the signs, but she had been in the high country too long. She was weak from the chase, weak from the lack of food. The heat found the cracks in her strength. She stumbled first. Silas caught her arm. "Easy." "I am fine," she said, her voice a dry rasp. She pulled her arm free, her pride still intact. But she was not fine. An hour later, she stumbled again, and this time she did not get up. She collapsed onto the hot sand, a quiet, boneless fall. "Ayanna!" Silas knelt, shaking her. Her skin was dry, terrifyingly hot to the touch. Her eyes were unfocused. She was breathing in short, shallow gasps, heat exhaustion, sliding into the deeper, deadlier sickness of the sun. He looked around. Nothing, no shade, no water, just rocks and sky. "No," he muttered. He said it to the sky, to the heat. "Not like this." He lifted her. She was light, too light. He put her on his back, her arms draped over his shoulders, her head lolling against his neck. He picked up the rifle and the empty canteen, and he began to walk. He carried her for the rest of that day. He walked until the sun set and the rocks turned purple, then black. He walked until his legs were screaming, his back a sheet of fire. He laid her down in the shallow shelter of a boulder, covering her with his own body as the desert chill set in. She was still burning, a dry heat that radiated from her. He found no water. The next morning, he lifted her again. He was walking into a void. He didn't know where the next water was. He just knew that stopping meant dying. He put one foot in front of the other. Sometime in the afternoon of the second day, she began to murmur. He thought, at first, it was just the fever, but the words were Apache. He didn't understand the language, but he understood the tone. It was the sound of apology. He stopped, leaning against a sheer rock face, his lungs heaving. He slid her down so he could see her face. Her eyes were barely open, the pupils tiny in the harsh light. "I am sorry," she whispered, the English words costing her. Her lips cracked and bloody. "Too weak. I am sorry." She was apologizing, for being a burden, for failing him. Silas looked at her, at this woman who had survived a massacre, survived an auction, survived him, only to be killed by the sun. He thought of the $2 he'd paid, a cruel mockery. He thought of the hunters. He thought of the life they might have had, a fleeting dream in a cold shack. He sank to his knees, still holding her, his body finally giving out. He pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her limp body. "No," he whispered, his voice thick. "I'm sorry. I did this. I brought this on you." He bowed his head over her, his shoulders shaking. And for the first time since he was a boy, for the first time since the war had scoured him clean of tears, Silas McCrae cried. They were not loud sobs. They were silent. Hot tears that fell from his eyes onto her dry, feverish face. He was crying for her, for the baby she'd lost, for the men he'd killed, for the simple, impossible fact that he loved her and he was watching her die. He must have passed out. He woke to the cold. The moon was high, a perfect silver coin, and it was cold. Ayanna was breathing, a faint, shallow rattle. He had to move. He got to his feet, his body screaming, his muscles locked. He lifted her. He walked. He walked for another hour. Or maybe it was 3. Time had no meaning. And then he saw it. A dark shape against the paler darkness of the sky. A wall. A structure. He stumbled toward it. It was an old mission church, abandoned, its roof half collapsing. Adobe walls, crumbling, but standing. He found a gap where a door had been and fell inside. It was dark, still, and blessedly cool. The thick adobe walls holding the night's chill like a promise. He laid her on the hard-packed dirt floor, near what was left of a ruined altar. In the old baptistry, he found it, a pool of water, captured from some long-ago rain, stagnant and thick. But it was water. He dipped his kerchief in it, ran back to her. He wet her lips, her face. He forced small sips into her mouth. She coughed, but she swallowed. He sat with his back to a crumbling pillar, holding her hand, and waited for the dawn. She was alive. The fever broke as the sun rose, a pale, watery light. She woke, her eyes clear, though she was weak, her body hollowed out. They stayed in the mission for 3 days. It was a sanctuary. No one came. Silas found a nearby spring, a thin trickle of clean water, and shot 2 quail. He made a broth in the canteen cup, feeding it to her, watching her strength slowly return. On the 3rd night, they sat by a tiny fire built in the shelter of the ruined nave. The moon shone through the hole in the roof, illuminating the broken wooden cross that still hung, crooked, on the far wall. "This is a holy place," Ayanna whispered, looking at the cross. "It's just mud bricks," Silas said, cleaning the rifle. "The people who built it are long gone." "No, it is a place of ghosts, but they are quiet ghosts." She turned to him. The firelight softened the lines on his face, making the scars seem to fade. "Silas?" "Yeah. If I had been born white—" She paused, her voice small. "If I was a woman from the town, with a hat and a proper dress, would you have loved me sooner?" The question hit him like a stone. He stopped cleaning the gun. He looked at her face, which was not the face of a white woman. It was the face he had seen on the auction block, the face he had watched in the rain. It was just her face. He thought of his answer. The easy answer was yes. The truth was harder. "I already did," he said, his voice low. "Right from the start. On that platform. I just didn't know how to let it show." He put the rifle down. "I didn't know what it was. I thought it was pity or shame or just spite for those men. It wasn't." He reached out, his hand rough against her cheek. "It was this. It just took me this long to be a man worth admitting it." She looked at him, and the tears that came to her eyes were not from fever or pain. They were from release. He leaned in, and he kissed her. This time it was not the desperate, hungry crash of bodies in the shack. It was tender. It was slow. It was a confirmation. It was the kiss of two people who had seen the absolute worst of each other and had not turned away. They made love on the dirt floor of the abandoned church, under the gaze of the broken cross. It was a quiet, deliberate act. It was not about survival or need. It was about belonging. It was two souls, stripped bare by the desert, finding a home in each other. Afterward, she lay against his chest, and she wept, quietly. He felt the tears on his skin. He didn't ask her why. He didn't ask if she was sad or happy or afraid. He just held her. He kissed the tears from her eyelids, from her cheeks. He kissed her mouth, tasting the salt of her, and he accepted it, all of it. They left the mission 2 days later. He had caught the horse, which had been grazing nearby. Ayanna was strong enough to ride. He walked beside her. They found a small group of vaqueros watering their string of ponies at a muddy river crossing. They were Mexicans, their face dark and creased by the sun. They watched Silas and Ayanna approach, their hands near their guns, their eyes wary. Silas raised his hand, palm out. "We're just looking to cross. Me no trouble." The leader, an older man with a gray mustache and eyes that had seen too much, looked at Silas, then at Ayanna. He saw the story. He nodded. "The desert is for everyone, Señor, and for no one." They offered them food, real food, jerky and hardtack and panocha, sweet and rich. They shared their water. It was a brief, peaceful sanctuary. As they were preparing to leave, the old man pulled Silas aside. "You are running from the Tejanos," he said. It was not a question. Silas nodded. "A sheriff named Bragg." "We saw them," the man said, his face serious. "3 men. They ride hard. They carry a shotgun. They asked about you, about her." He nodded to Ayanna. "We told them we saw nothing. We told them you rode south, toward the border." "How far back?" Silas asked, his stomach cold. "One day, maybe less now. They ride for the bounty. They will not stop. They are angry. You should not have come west. You should have gone south, as we told them." "Thank you," Silas said. He went back to Ayanna, his face set. That night they camped in a high-walled canyon. The pursuit was real. It was close. "We gotta split," Silas said, staring into the fire. He wasn't looking at her. Ayanna stopped twisting the cord she was braiding. "What?" "I can draw them off," he said, his voice flat. "I'll head south. Make a lot of sign. You take the horse. Keep heading west. You know how to survive. You can lose them. Find a ranch. Find work. Be free." He was offering her an escape. He was offering to sacrifice himself. The final, stupid act of a man trying to save her. Ayanna stared at him. She saw the man at the auction. She saw the man in the desert. She saw him offering to save her, to trade his life for hers, as if her life was still a thing to be bartered. She stood up and, in one swift motion, she slapped him, hard. His head snapped to the side, the sound of the blow sharp in the cold night air. He looked at her, his eyes wide with shock. "No," she said, her voice shaking with a rage so deep it was almost a sob. "I will not be traded. I will not be saved again. I am not your $2 burden. I am not your shame." She knelt in front of him, grabbing his shirt, her face inches from his. "You do not decide for me. Not anymore. I am not a thing you buy, or a thing you save, or a thing you send away. Do you understand? Ayanna, they'll kill you, he whispered, his hand on his stinging cheek. They will kill us, she corrected him. Or we will kill them. If we die, it is together. I will not run. He looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, the absolute unbreakable strength. She was not the girl on the platform. She was not the sick woman in the desert. She was his equal. She was his partner. He nodded, a slow, final acceptance. He reached up and covered her hand with his. Together. The next morning, they found their spot. It was a narrow pass in a rocky canyon. The trail was choked with boulders, only wide enough for one horse at a time. High, sheer walls on either side. An ambush. They'll have to come through here, Silas said, his voice grim. They'll be slow. We'll be above them. They spent the morning preparing for a final stand. They left the horse tied in a box canyon half a mile back. They climbed the canyon walls, finding ledges that gave them a clear view of the pass. They had the rifle and the pistol. Silas took the rifle. He gave Ayanna the pistol and the extra bullets. You're a better shot, she said. I am, he agreed. But this rifle has 100 yards. That pistol has 20. I need you to cover the bottleneck. When they're in the pass, they'll be close. Just wait till you can't miss. Wait for my shot. They didn't have traps, not real ones. But Silas worked, straining, to loosen a large boulder on the ledge above the trail. He wedged it with a smaller stone. A good push would send it down. They made peace with dying. They sat on the ledge, hidden from below, the sun beating down. Silas, she whispered. Yeah, I am afraid. Me too, he said. He took her hand. It was the first time he had ever just held it. Not as a lover, not as a captor, but as a partner. Me too. They waited for hours. Then they heard it. The clink of a shod horse on rock. Voices. He's gotta be this way. A voice drifted up. It was Bragg. The Mex trail leads right here. They ain't got nowhere else to run. 3 riders, Bragg in the lead, his shotgun resting on his saddle. The 2 hunters from the shack, the one with the broken nose, and his friend. They rode into the pass, single file. Silas waited. He let Bragg pass the spot. He let the second man, the friend, come into view. Now, Silas whispered. He put his shoulder to the boulder. He shoved. It crashed down, a terrifying roar of falling rock. It didn't hit Bragg. It hit the second man's horse. The animal screamed, collapsing, pinning the hunter beneath it. Bragg wheeled his horse, pulling his shotgun. Ambush! Silas fired the rifle. The shot echoed, deafening in the pass. He hit Bragg's horse in the chest. It reared, screaming, and threw Bragg to the ground. The third man, the one with the broken nose, jumped from his horse and dove for cover behind a rock. Up there! Bragg yelled, scrambling, firing his shotgun up at Silas's ledge. The buckshot spattered against the rock face, stinging Silas with stone chips. The hunter pinned under his horse was screaming. The third hunter, behind the rock, raised his rifle and fired at Silas. The bullet hit the stone near Silas's head, sending a chip into his cheek, drawing blood. Silas ducked, reloaded. Ayanna, the one behind the rock, he's too close! Ayanna looked down. The man was almost directly below her, maybe 30 yards. He was reloading, focused on Silas. He hadn't seen her. She raised the pistol, both hands, just as Silas had taught her. Her hands were shaking. Squeeze! Don't jerk! She fired. The man grunted, dropping his rifle, clutching his arm. He was wounded, not dead. Bragg was on his feet, reloading his shotgun. He was exposed. Silas rose, aimed the rifle. At the same moment, the hunter Ayanna had shot, the one with the broken nose, looked up. He saw her. He drew his pistol with his good hand, his face a mask of hate. "You!" he screamed. "Injun whore!" He fired at her. Silas, seeing the man aim at Ayanna, shifted his own aim from Bragg to the hunter. 2 shots exploded at once. Silas's bullet hit the hunter in the chest, throwing him back against the rocks, dead. The hunter's bullet hit Silas. Silas yelled, a sharp, choked sound, and collapsed on the ledge. The rifle clattered from his hands. "Silas!" Ayanna screamed. She looked at him. A dark red stain was spreading across his left shoulder. Down below, Bragg was laughing, a harsh, ugly sound. "Got one of them! Now, you bitch! You're all alone! I'm coming up!" He raised his shotgun, walking toward the base of her ledge. Ayanna looked at Silas, bleeding, at Bragg, reloading, at the hunter she had shot in the arm, who was now dead, killed by Silas, at the man under the horse, who had stopped screaming and was now moaning. She had the pistol. It had 4 shots left. Bragg was at the base of the cliff. "Come on down, girl. The bounty's just as good if you're dead." Ayanna didn't fire. She crawled to Silas. He was conscious, his face pale, biting his lip in pain. "Go!" he gasped. "Run! Take the horse!" "Together," she said. She grabbed his rifle. It was heavy. She knew how to load it. She checked the chamber. 1 shot. She looked over the ledge. Bragg was standing by the dead hunter, pulling the rifle from his dead hands. She aimed. Silas's rifle, heavy, stable. She rested it on the rock. She aimed for the star on his chest. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked, slamming her shoulder. Bragg looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. He had no gun in his hand. He looked down at his chest, where a red flower was blooming. He fell to his knees, then flat on his face. Silence. The only sound was the wind and the moaning of the man pinned under the horse. Ayanna let the rifle fall. She was shaking. She had killed him. She had killed a man. She crawled back to Silas. "It's done." She tore his shirt, packing the wound. It was high in the shoulder. A lot of blood, but it looked like it went clean through. The moaning from the canyon floor was a terrible, weak sound. "Help! Me!" Ayanna looked at Silas. "He's the last one," she said. She checked the pistol. She climbed down the rock face, her legs trembling. The hunter was pinned, his leg crushed. His eyes were wide with terror when he saw her. "Please," he begged. "Don't. I give up. Get this horse off me." Ayanna looked at him. She saw the faces from the auction. She saw the man who had called her a squaw. She raised the pistol. "No, please!" She fired. The sound was flat. The moaning stopped. She stood over the body, breathing hard. She went to Bragg, dead. She went to the hunter Silas had shot, dead. She was a killer. She felt nothing. No, that wasn't true. She felt a cold, hard release. It was over. The canyon floor was soaked in blood. The air smelled of iron and death. She got Silas down from the ledge. It was a slow, agonizing process. She tended his wound as best she could with what little they had. "We have to bury them," Silas whispered. "Or the buzzards, they'll tell a story." Ayanna looked at the 3 bodies. "No, we bury one." She took the rifle. She walked back to the hunter she had shot, the one who had aimed at her. She dragged him, by his heels, to a shallow wash. She found a piece of broken rock and, with her bare hands, she began to dig, scraping away the stones and dirt. Silas watched her, too weak to move. It took her hours. She didn't cry. She didn't pray. She just worked, a grim, steady motion. She rolled the body into the shallow grave and covered it with rocks. She was burying the man who had tried to kill her. She was burying the girl from the auction. She was burying her past. When it was done, she stood over the pile of stones, her hands bloody and raw. She was no longer afraid. She helped Silas onto Bragg's horse, the only one left uninjured, and they rode west, leaving the other bodies to the desert. They rode west But it was not a ride. It was a crawl. Silas was a dead weight on Bragg's horse. Semi-conscious, his left arm strapped tight to his chest with his own belt. The wound in his shoulder, high and clean through, had bled itself out for 2 days, and now the fever was setting in. Ayanna walked, leading the horse. She was the one who was whole. She was the one who knew this land. The heat of the low desert was back, but it was a different heat. It was dry, brittle. She felt no exhaustion. The killings in the canyon had burned something out of her, something soft and fearful. She was hollow, but she was hard. She found water at a seep. She got Silas off the horse, his body slumping, and cleaned the wound again. It was dark, the edges puckered and angry. She had no herbs, no poultice. She had only water and rage. "You will not die," she told him, her voice a low command. "I did not kill those men for you to die." He looked at her, his eyes clouded with fever. "Should have let him. Ayanna, should have let him." "Be silent," she said. She got him back on the horse. On the 4th day since the canyon, when the water was gone and Silas had stopped murmuring, she saw it. It was not a mirage. It was green, a thin, improbable line of green in a valley of brown, the mark of a real, year-round creek, and beside it, smoke, rising straight and clean in the still afternoon air. She drew the pistol. She led the horse toward the smoke, keeping to the cover of the low, rocky ridge. It was a homestead, a small, neat cabin built of cottonwood logs and sod, not the rough pine of the high country. A well-tended garden, fenced against the rabbits. A corral holding 2 mules and a milk cow. A man was in the garden, his back to her. He was tall, his dark skin shining with sweat, his clothes simple but clean. He was hoeing a line of corn. Ayanna stopped. She was hidden, but the horse, smelling the water, let out a low, desperate sound. The man froze. He did not turn. Slowly, he placed his hoe on the ground and raised his hands, palms empty. "We ain't armed," he called out, his voice deep and calm. "Not out here. We mean no harm." Ayanna stepped out from the rocks, leading the horse. She kept the pistol down, but her hand was on it. The man turned. He was older, his hair a tight cap of gray, his face lined with a kindness that looked ancient and earned. He looked at her, his eyes taking in her Apache dress, the pistol, the bloody, slumped white man on the horse. His gaze lingered on Silas, and a deep sadness, a flicker of recognition, crossed his face. The cabin door opened. A woman came out, wiping her hands on an apron. She was as tall as the man, her face broad and strong. She held a shotgun, and she held it like she knew it. "Ezra," she called. "It's all right. Martha." "The man," Ezra said. He took a step toward Ayanna. "He's hurt bad." "He's my husband." Ayanna lied. The word felt strange and heavy in her mouth. She didn't know why she said it. Maybe it was a claim, a shield. Martha looked at her, then at Silas. She lowered the shotgun. "Husband or not, he's dying. Bring him inside." They carried him. Ezra took his shoulders. Ayanna his legs. He was lighter than he should be. They laid him on a simple rope bed inside the cabin, which was small but immaculately clean, and smelled of baking bread and dried herbs. "He was shot," Ayanna said, her voice flat. 4 days ago, in the shoulder." Martha clicked her tongue, a sound of disapproval. She bustled around the cabin, bringing a basin of hot water, clean rags, and a small wooden box. "Ezra, get the whiskey. Not for him, for this." For the next hour, Martha worked. She was a healer. Her hands, calloused from the garden and the lye soap, were unbelievably gentle. She cleaned the wound, which was festering, the flesh dark and angry. "He's lucky," Martha murmured, probing the wound. "It went clean, no bullet to dig for, but it's poisoned." She made a poultice of bread soaked in milk and some dark, strong-smelling herb from her box. She packed it into the entry and exit wounds, her movements firm, efficient. Silas groaned, a low, animal sound, but he did not wake. "Now," Martha said, standing back. "We boiled the fever out." She wrapped him in heavy wool blankets. She made a tea, forcing the hot, bitter liquid between his clenched teeth. "You," Martha said, turning to Ayanna. "You look like a ghost yourself. Sit." She pushed Ayanna onto a stool and gave her a bowl of hot broth. Ayanna ate. It was the first real food she'd had in over a week. The warmth spread through her, and with it, an exhaustion so profound she nearly fell from the stool. She slept for a day, curled on a pallet Martha had laid by the hearth, the deepest, darkest sleep of her life. When she woke, the cabin was quiet. Silas was still on the bed, his breathing shallow, but the desperate, rasping heat was gone. Martha sat beside him, knitting. "He's better," Martha said, not looking up. "Fever broke this morning. He's a fighter." "I know," Ayanna said. She went outside. Ezra was by the corral, mending a bridle. He looked up as she approached. "He's a strong man," Ezra said. "You're a strong woman. To get him here." "I am a desperate woman," Ayanna corrected. Ezra smiled, a small, kind expression. "Ain't we all? Ain't we all?" He held up a long strip of leather. "I saw you checking the land this morning. When you first got here, you know how to read sign." "I know Apache sign," she said. "That's good," Ezra said. "But you ain't being hunted by Apache. You're being hunted by white men, and they read sign different. They look for different things." He walked her out, away from the cabin. He showed her things she had never noticed. How a white man's boot, heavier on the heel, left a different print than a moccasin. How they broke branches instead of bending them. How they built fires, big and careless, that left deep scars on the earth. "They ain't looking for the trail," Ezra explained, pointing to a barely visible scrape on a rock. "They're looking for the mistake. That's how they hunt. You want to lose 'em? You don't just hide your trail. You make a new one that tells a story they want to believe." He was a good teacher. He had been hunted too. He and Martha. They had escaped slavery in Louisiana 30 years ago. They had come west, past the reach of the law, and built this life from the mud and the water. They understood running. "Thank you," Ayanna said. It was more than a lesson in tracking. It was a lesson in survival. He had seen her as a warrior, not just a woman or a runaway. She spent the next few days in a quiet rhythm. She helped Martha in the garden. She learned to milk the cow. She sat outside the cabin in the long, quiet afternoons, the pistol on her lap. Silas was healing, sleeping a deep, natural sleep. She found a piece of dry, hard cottonwood. She took out her knife, the one she had used to dig a grave, and she began to carve. Her hands, which knew how to clean, how to shoot, how to patch, how to kill, found a new purpose. She carved, not with any plan, but letting the wood tell her what it was. It became a shape, a circle, round and complete, with no beginning and no end. And inside the circle, she carved a flame, the flame that had destroyed her village, the flame that had burned in the hearth of the shack, the flame of the gunfire in the canyon, the flame that was burning in her, a hard, clean fire that had burned away her fear. It was a symbol of rebirth. She was not the girl from the auction. She was this, a circle of survival, and a core of fire. She bored a hole in it, tied it on a leather thong Ezra had given her, and put it around her neck. It lay against her skin, solid and warm. On the 5th day, Silas woke. His eyes were clear. He saw her, sitting by the window, the carving at her throat. "Ayanna," he rasped. She went to him, gave him water. He looked around the cabin, at the clean sheets, at Martha, who nodded at him and went outside. Where? A safe place, she said. They are good people. He lay back, his weakness a heavy, frustrating weight. He watched her. He watched her move through the cabin. He saw the new, hard-set line of her jaw. He saw the way she moved, with a purpose that was entirely her own. He saw her talking to Ezra by the corral, saw them laugh, a short, shared sound. He saw her resting her hand on Martha's arm. She was fitting in here. She was finding a peace he had never been able to give her. He had brought her nothing but blood. The auction, the hunters, the chase, the canyon. He had almost gotten her killed. That night, he asked Ezra to help him outside. He sat on a bench, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the vast, starry sky. She's good here, Silas said, his voice weak. Ezra sat beside him, smoking a pipe. She's a rare woman, full of spirit, stronger than she knows. They're still hunting us, Silas said, the words tasting like ash. Maybe not Bragg, but the law, that poster. It won't just go away. No, Ezra agreed. It won't. She deserves peace, Silas whispered. She deserves to plant things, to not look over her shoulder. She could stay here, with you and Martha. She'd be safe. They'd never look for her here. She could have a life. Ezra took a long pull on his pipe, the smoke rising in a gray plume. She could. Martha loves her like a daughter. And she's smart. She's a survivor. So I'll leave, Silas said, the decision tearing him apart. When I'm strong enough, I'll ride out, head south. They'll follow me. They want me as much as her. She'll be free. Ezra turned his head, his eyes sad in the starlight. You think you're doing a noble thing, son? I'm doing the right thing, Silas said. You're making a choice for her, Ezra said, his voice quiet but sharp as a razor. You're deciding her life, just like the men at that auction, just like that Texas sheriff. You ain't no different. Silas stared at him, stunned. I'm trying to save her. She don't want saving, Ezra said. She wants a partner. You ain't offering to be her partner. You're offering to be her ghost. Don't you put that on her. Don't you make her live with that. Ezra stood up. You want to leave? Leave. But you tell her to her face why. You tell her you're too weak to stay. Don't you dare tell her it's for her. He left Silas alone in the dark. The next day, Silas found her by the creek. She was washing clothes, her sleeves rolled up, her arms strong and brown. He was stronger, walking on his own, his arm in a sling Martha had made. Ayanna. She looked up, her expression unreadable. I've been talking with Ezra, he started, his voice clumsy. This place, it's good. It's safe. Martha and him, they like you. You're good here. You're happy. She went still, her hands submerged in the soapy water. What are you saying, Silas? I'm saying that bounty poster is still out there, and as long as I'm with you, they'll hunt you. They'll hunt us. But if I'm gone, they'll hunt me. I'll lead 'em south, to Mexico. You can stay here. You can be safe. You deserve peace. Ayanna, not this. He was offering her up, again, for her own good. He was deciding for her. She rose from the creek bank. Her hands were dripping. She walked up to him, her face a mask of cold, controlled fury. He thought she would cry. He thought she would argue. She slapped him. She put her entire body into it, a sharp, cracking blow against his good cheek. It was the second time she had hit him. The first time, he had been a fool. This time, he was a coward. His head snapped back. He stared at her, his eyes wide with shock. You, she said, her voice low, trembling with a power that terrified him. You will not decide for me. You do not get to decide. You think you are Ezra? You think you are God? You are a man. Silas, just a man. My man. but you are not my master. You are trying to run, she cut him off. You are afraid. You are afraid you will get me killed. But I am not a child. I was not a child in the canyon. I killed a man. I buried him. I chose to be there. I chose you. She poked him in the chest, hard, with one finger. You are not deciding for me, ever, again. If we run together. If we die together. But we decide. She stood there, breathing hard, her eyes blazing. Silas looked at her. He saw the woman from the canyon, the woman who had buried the dead. He saw the girl who had carved the circle of fire. He saw, for the first time, not what he had to protect, but who he was standing beside. He touched his cheek, where her handprint was already fading. All right, he whispered. Together. That night, Ezra and Martha sat with them by the fire. The tension was gone, replaced by a grim resolution. You can't stay here, Ezra said, his voice practical. Not because of us, we'd keep you, but because of what's coming, the railroad. We're west of the rail line, Silas said. For now, Ezra said. They're pushing a new spur line through the territory. Surveyors were here last spring. They want this valley. They want this water. And when the railroad comes, the settlers come. And when the settlers come, the order comes. Order? Ayanna asked. Men like Bragg, Martha said, her voice hard. Men who want the world neat. Men who believe in their law. And their law says a white man can't live with a black woman. It says he can't live with an Apache woman. Any interracial mixing, it's a threat to them. It's disorder. They'll come for us. And they'll come for you. They'll call it progress. They were in the same boat, hunted. So we go, Silas said. We go west, past the rail lines, past where they're building, to California, or Oregon, somewhere, empty. There ain't no empty left, son, Ezra said softly. But there's places they ain't got to yet. The next day, Silas took Bragg's horse, the last remaining link to their past, and rode to a small, dusty settlement 2 days' journey south. It was not Tres Piedras. No one knew him there. He sold the horse. It was a good horse, and he got a decent price. He didn't buy another. He bought a small, rickety wagon, a plow mule to pull it, 2 sacks of flour, beans, salt, ammunition, and an axe. It was a statement. He was no longer a drifter. He was building. When he returned, Ayanna was packed. Martha had given her a heavy wool blanket, a cast-iron skillet, and a bag of her dried herbs. Ezra had given Silas a new canteen and a map, drawn from memory of the water holes to the west. They would leave in the morning. The homestead had no barn, only a shed, small and full. That night, Ezra offered them the cabin, but Silas refused. They would sleep in the wagon. But Ayanna looked at the hay stored in the loft of the mule shed. There, she said. It was their last night. The air was cool and smelled of dry hay and mule. They lay on a bed of hay, the wagon outside, a dark shape in the moonlight, ready for the journey. This was not the desperate fumbling in the shack. It was not the tender discovery in the mission. It was something else. It was raw. It was desperate. Yes, but it was the desperation of commitment. It was a final, trembling honesty. Ayanna lay in his arms, his one good arm, her head on his chest. She touched the carving at her throat. I was taught to hate, she said, her voice so low he had to strain to hear it. My mother, my father, they were good. But the soldiers, the men at the auction, the hunters, I was made to hate men. I thought all men were empty or cruel. She raised her head, looking at him in the dark. But you were cruel, and you were kind. You were a fool, and you were brave. You saw me. You didn't try to make me white. You didn't try to make me a slave. She touched his face. his scar. "I was made to hate men, but you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You taught me to want one." Silas felt his throat close. He couldn't speak. He pulled her closer, his heart aching. He had done nothing to deserve this. He was a killer, a drifter, a coward who had tried to run. "Ayanna," he said, his voice thick. "When I bought you, I told you, I used to be one of those men, a drunk, a killer. After the war, I was nothing, just a ghost. I didn't care if I lived or died." He held her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "You," he said, "you had lost everything, everything, and you still had fire. You had that pride. You wouldn't break. You fought me. You fought the desert. You fought the fever. You saved me in that town. You saved me in that canyon. You saved me yesterday. From myself." He kissed her, a deep, slow kiss full of salt and hay and desperation. "You didn't just teach me how to want, Ayanna. You made me a man worth being." He pulled the blanket over them, and in the quiet of the shed, surrounded by the smell of hay, they came together, a raw, silent promise against the coming dark. They left the homestead at dawn. The wagon was heavy, the single mule straining, but it moved. They were pointed west, toward a line on Ezra's hand-drawn map, toward a place called California. The land did not change quickly. For weeks, they were still in the high desert, a vast, dry emptiness that felt familiar, but the pursuit was gone. The silence behind them was no longer the silence of a hunter, but the silence of empty space. Silas's shoulder healed badly. The wound closed, thanks to Martha's herbs, but the damage was deep. The nerve had been pinched or severed. His left arm was weak, the fingers clumsy, and a strange, sympathetic limp had developed in his left leg, a dragging deadness that came from the nerve damage high in his back. He was no longer the man who could walk all day. He sat in the wagon, the rifle across his lap, his face pale and tight, while Ayanna walked beside the mule, or drove. She was the strength now. She was the hunter. She took the rifle, the one she had used to kill Bragg, and she learned it. She stalked deer, rabbit, wild turkey. She brought back meat. She set the snares. She chose the campsites. She was the one who read the land. He watched her. He watched her skin the rabbits, her hands sure and quick. He watched her stand on the ridges, sniffing the air, her black hair loose in the wind. He saw the carving at her throat, the circle and the flame. He saw the woman who had buried a man, the woman who had saved him, and he saw the woman who had slapped him for being a fool. He loved her with a force that was quiet and aching and absolute. One day, after nearly 2 months of travel, she stopped. She pointed. "Smell," she said. He sniffed the air. It was not dust. It was not pine. It was wet. It was damp earth and rot and salt. The next day, the brown and red gave way to a deep, startling green. They came over a rise and looked down into a valley filled with trees so tall they seemed to hold up the sky. It was a forest, but not like the high country pines. This was a place of giants, of deep, permanent shadow. And through it, a river, wide and fast and clear, rushing toward the sea. They had crossed the border. They were in California. The air was cool, almost cold, though it was summer. A thick mist hung in the trees. They found a clearing near the riverbank, a place where the sun broke through. "Here," Ayanna said. "We stop here." It felt like possibility. It felt like an ending. They had made it. Silas, his leg dragging, got down from the wagon. He walked to the river, splashed the cold, clean water on his face. Ayanna unhitched the mule and let it drink. For the first time since the auction, they breathed. They made camp. That night, they ate roasted trout, fished from the river by Ayanna. They sat by the fire, the sound of the water a constant, rushing peace. "We can build here," Silas said, his voice rough. "These trees." It's good timber. We have the wagon, the tools." "Yes," she said. She leaned against him, her head on his good shoulder. "We can build." He was half asleep, the fire warm on his face, when Ayanna suddenly went rigid. "What?" he said. "Listen," she whispered. He heard it. Not the river, not the wind, the crunch of a boot on stone, downriver. Silas grabbed the rifle. Ayanna had her knife in her hand, the pistol in her waistband. They moved into the shadows, their backs to a giant redwood. A figure emerged from the trees, limping. It was a man, but he looked like a corpse. His clothes were in tatters. One arm was bound in a filthy rag, his hand dark and swollen. His face was a mass of sun-blistered, bearded flesh. But the eyes were bright with a terrible, obsessive fire. It was Bragg. "I knew it," he rasped, his voice a dry crackle. "I knew you'd come west, knew you'd follow the water." Silas raised the rifle, but he was too slow. Bragg, seeing the movement, raised a pistol, a rusty old cap and ball, and fired. The shot went wide, but the explosion of it, the threat of it, was enough. Silas fired back, his wounded shoulder betraying him. The recoil sent a shock of agony up his arm, and his shot hit the dirt at Bragg's feet. Bragg laughed, a terrible, choked sound. "You're done, McCrae. You're broken, and she's mine. The bounty's mine." He lunged, not at Silas, but at Ayanna. He was faster than he looked, a desperate, dying animal. Ayanna raised her pistol and fired. The click was hollow, empty. She had not reloaded since the canyon. Silas yelled, trying to bring the rifle around as a club, but his limp betrayed him. He stumbled. Bragg hit Ayanna like a falling tree. He grabbed her, his one good hand tangling in her hair, the other, swollen hand, clubbing her across the face. "You shot me, bitch! You shot me in the star, broke my ribs, left me for dead." They crashed into the shallow water of the riverbank. "I buried you!" Ayanna screamed, fighting him, clawing at his face. "You buried the hunter! You thought I was dead!" he roared, his face a mask of madness. "I woke up. I've been walking for weeks. Just for this. Just for you." Silas was on his feet, scrambling, reloading the rifle, his fingers clumsy, shaking. Bragg saw him. He grabbed Ayanna, pulling her up as a shield, and dragged her deeper, into the current. "Drop it, McCrae, or I'll drown her!" The water was cold, shockingly cold. It was snowmelt. It grabbed at Ayanna's legs, pulling her down. Bragg was strong, his obsession giving him a final, terrible strength. He was trying to get to the far bank. Ayanna knew Silas couldn't shoot. She knew his arm was useless. This was her fight. It had always been her fight. She stopped struggling. She went limp, a dead weight in his arms. Surprised, Bragg stumbled, the current catching him. "That's right, girl," he sneered, pulling her head back by the hair. "Give up." She let her body sink, pulling him off balance. And then she exploded. She drove her knee into his groin, hard. He roared in pain, his grip loosening. It was all she needed. She did not try to run. She did not try to swim away. She turned on him. She was a river creature, a thing of water and rage. She grabbed his head, her hands tangling in his greasy hair, and she pulled. He fell forward, sputtering. The water was waist deep here, but the current was a freight train. He tried to hit her, but she was inside his guard. She was all fury. She grabbed his wounded arm, the one he had tried to protect, and twisted it. He screamed, a high, thin sound that was cut off by the water. He was trying to stand, to bring his weight to bear. "I'll kill you! I'll kill you!" "You are already dead," she hissed, her voice a snarl. She shoved him under. He came up, coughing. She shoved him under again. He was heavy, but the water helped her. He was fighting, his hands clawing at her, finding her throat. His thumb pressed into her windpipe. Black spots danced in her vision. She was drowning. She looked past him. On the bank, Silas was watching. Helpless, his face a mask of terror. He couldn't help her. She let go of his arm. With her last bit of air, she found the knife at her belt. He was holding her, choking her, his face inches from hers, his eyes wide with triumphant hate. She brought the knife up, under his ribs, and pushed with all the strength she had left. The pressure on her throat vanished. His eyes widened, not in anger, in surprise. He looked down, as if confused, at the hilt of the knife buried in his chest. He let go of her. The river took him. He was swept away, a dark shape turning over in the white water. And then he was gone. Ayanna stood in the river, the water rushing around her waist. She was coughing, gasping, sucking in the cold. Wet air. She was alive. Silas was in the water, his limp forgotten. He reached her, his good arm wrapping around her, pulling her out of the current. He half dragged, half carried her to the bank. She collapsed on the wet stones, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. He fell beside her, pulling her against his chest, holding her, rocking her. "You're safe," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You're safe. It's over. It's finally over." And Ayanna broke. It was not a cry. It was a sob, a raw, deep, agonizing sound that came from the very bottom of her soul. It was the sound of the girl on the auction block. It was the sound of the woman who had buried her cousin. It was the sound of the killer in the canyon. It was the sound of the woman who had just drowned a man. She sobbed for her freedom. She sobbed for the price of it. She cried from a place of pure, blinding release. The ghost was gone. The hunt was over. Silas just held her, his own tears running silently into her wet hair, his body shaking with hers. He held her until the shaking stopped, until the sobs quieted, until the only sound was the rush of the river that had saved them. They found his body the next morning, washed up on a sandbar a mile downstream. He was pale, his eyes open to the sky. The knife was still in him. They pulled him onto the bank. Silas, using his good hand, unpinned the Texas star from his rotting vest. It was dented, a deep gouge in the center where Ayanna's bullet had struck. They didn't bury him. They left him for the buzzards, for the land to reclaim. But they took the badge. They built a small, hot fire by the river, using dry driftwood. They said nothing. They watched the metal heat, turn red, then blacken and warp. The tin melted, the star losing its shape, becoming a lump of nothing. When it was cold, they took the lump of burned metal and, together, they scattered the ashes and the slag into the river. They watched the water carry the last piece of their old life away. Months passed. The seasons turned. They built their cabin, not in the clearing, but back from the river, among the giant redwood trees. The work was slow. Silas, with his one good arm and his dragging leg, could not lift the heavy logs, but he could hew them. He could sit and carve the joints. Ayanna, strong and tireless, did the heavy work. She used the mule to drag the logs. She set them. She chinked the walls with mud and moss. It was a small cabin, just one room, but the chimney was stone, and it drew well. It was a home. They were not alone. A small community of Miwok people lived in the valley, and a few white families. Settlers who had come for the timber lived further down the coast. Silas's limp was permanent. He could not hunt, but he learned to mend. He became the settlement's leather worker, mending harnesses, making boots. His one good hand quick and skilled. Ayanna became a healer. She taught the local children, Miwok and white, which herbs to use for fever, which roots for a cough. She taught them her people's songs, and they taught her theirs. She was no longer just a survivor. She was Ayanna. One night, a year after they had come to the forest, they sat by their fire. It was winter. Outside, the wind howled, a deep, mournful sound, and a cold rain lashed against the roof. But the cabin was warm, the fire bright. Silas was rubbing oil into a new bridle, his face calm in the firelight. Ayanna was mending one of her own shirts, the carving, the circle, and the flame, rising and falling at her throat. She looked at him. She looked at his scar, his limp, his good hand. She looked at the home they had built. She was, for the first time in her memory, completely safe. "Silas?" she said, her voice quiet. He looked up. "Yes?" "Do you still regret it?" "Regret what?" "Buying me," she said, "for $2, in the dust." He put the bridle down. He looked at her, his gray eyes soft. He held out his good hand. She put her mending aside and took it. He pulled her, gently, out of her chair and onto his lap. She was light, her body fitting against his. He wrapped his good arm around her, his hand resting on her waist. "I didn't buy you, Ayanna," he said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "I've known that for a long time. I just paid $2 for my own salvation." She smiled, a small, slow smile. She leaned her head against his chest, closing her eyes, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Outside, the wolves howled, calling to each other in the dark. Wet forest. But the cabin was warm, the door was barred, and they were no longer afraid. Thank you for listening to this story. We'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from, so please drop a comment and let us know. If you enjoyed this, be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories just like it. And we want to hear your thoughts. What part of Ayanna and Silas's journey stayed with you? Share your thoughts in English below.